We'll begin with some introductions. We'll start down here at my far left, and we'll make a round and then go out in the room.
James Chambers, CenturyLink Large Telecom.
Blake DeRucci, Iowa Homeland Security Emergency Management 911 Program Manager.
Rob Dennett, representing the Iowa EMS Association.
George Griffith, Iowa Peace Officers Association.
Rob Rotter, representing Iowa State Sheriffs and Deputies Association.
Sally Hall, is it on? Do you hear me? Sally Hall, representing Iowa APCO.
Rob Copper, representing the Iowa chapter of NENA.
Mike Bryant, representing the Iowa Professional Firefighters.
Bob Seibert, Shelby County, representing the Iowa Emergency Managers Association.
Jack D'Angelo, Sully Telephone, representing small telcos.
Dave Kaus, representing PCS providers.
Tracy Bearden, Polk County Emergency Management.
Wayne Johnson, CenturyLink, representing large telco as an alternate.
Joni Nickel, Iowa Utilities Board.
Rob Bowers, Iowa State University.
Doug Houghton, City of Ames.
Amanda Roush, Story County 911.
Mike Casper, Lynn County Sheriff's Office.
Jason Studi, Pot County 911.
Sherry Schmitz with Motorola.
Diane Seifert, South Central Iowa.
Tim Malott, Cedar County Emergency Management 911.
Nicole Withington, Cedar County.
Craig Allen, Swick.
Brian Madewell, Westcom.
Jeff Anderson, Marion County 911.
Samantha Brea, Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management.
James Lundstead, DHS, OEC.
Andy Buffington, Hancock County 911.
Brent Long, Polk County Sheriff's Office.
Curtis Pione, Polk County Sheriff's Office.
And now back to you.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Appreciate that. Looking for approval of the March 9th meeting minutes.
Also move. I'll second.
Okay, we have motion and second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And approval of today's agenda.
There.
Yes.
Item 7A.
Yes.
Correction to my name is ROB.
Duly noted. I don't know how that happened. Well, I do know how it happened. But. Okay. Do we have a motion for the?
Yes.
Okay.
Make a motion.
And we had a second.
Thank you.
Who seconded that?
The agenda? I did.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, State of Iowa Administrator Blake.
Right, not a ton of substantial updates for this month. There are now 28 counties who have tested text to 911. We've had a couple developments there. Mergitech was finally able to get their first CPE turned up for text. That was in Emmett County yesterday. Emergency Call Works has started to schedule their upgrades as well. They have one on Friday and another one next week. We were going to have our first Viper turned up today. That fell through, so they have another one scheduled for next week. Hopefully that one does not. So still about 2 or 3 counties are converting on a weekly basis. So I'm fairly confident and comfortable with where we're at right now, but we are going to send a couple letters to a couple of the vendors who we have contracts with to stress the importance of upping their game a little bit in the next couple months to make sure we meet the June 30th deadline. Along those lines, for text 911, as we do get closer to statewide capability, we are going to roll out our public education materials. I hope to have something for you today, but it wasn't quite exactly what I was looking for, the first draft, so it kind of went back to the drawing board on the printed materials. As soon as I get those done, we'll get them printed or get them electronically to all the PSAPs and all the jurisdictions, so you can either print them off yourselves or use the ones that we have printed for you. And again, just to reiterate, once counties go and have the ability to do text to 911, we're letting the local PSAPs do any marketing or media that they want to do locally with local regional or local media outlets. And then we'll begin our statewide campaign here, like I said, around in May. Similarly, we have a standing contract with our department and I believe Learfield to do radio spots. So we have that standing contract already in place. I have a meeting with them next week to discuss what we want to do for a public education campaign on text to 911. We are able to guarantee exactly how many times that those ads air in every county. So, you know, they hit benchmarks however many times during which hours of the day in every single county. And they put together the script, if you will. So it's a good contract. I'm asking, I guess, for about a $40,000 budget for that. That would still leave about $25,000 out of the $100,000 for the council travel, public education, training budget. So if you think about it this way, we have less than a quarter to go and still a quarter of that budget remaining. And that, like I said, would incorporate that $40,000 I'm kind of asking for. I don't know if you want to put it to a vote or just, I see a lot of head nods in the affirmative. I think I need to consult with you, so I'm doing that now. Any questions, concerns? Anyone have any issues on that?
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we allocate $40,000 out of the travel expense public education fund to support radio spots, broad PSAs through Blake there.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have motion and second. All in favor say aye. Aye, opposed. Okay.
Awesome. And just, again, a couple other things. The 911 bill that has been moving through the Senate for a while now has changed numbers again. It's now Senate File 500. Initially, the plan, I thought, was to be placed on the agenda for discussion on the Senate floor today. That's not on the agenda at this point, so now they're looking at Monday. The other thing that I got from our legislative liaison just on the way here was that the legislators are looking to wrap up next Friday. So that means it gives us about 5 days to get that bill voted on and approved in the Senate. The House is kind of knows what's going on with it. I'm feeling pretty comfortable with where we're at the House, even though they don't have a mirrored bill to go along with that. So again, that's supposed to be put on the docket now on Monday. And I know Bob has a couple talking points on some amendments, but I think I'll wait and touch on those when we get to the legislative part of the agenda. Couple other things, and this is, again, I don't have a lot of topics for today. So I know right after the 911 council meeting last month, there was a lot in the media about an AT&T outage, and I just kind of wanted to touch base on where we're at with that. The FCC is looking into that outage. If you remember, I think all of the PSAPs, including us in the 911 program, got some automated alerts that there was a 911 outage by AT&T that could be affecting your PSAP. And like a lot of those automated alerts that we receive, they're usually not very timely, not actionable at all, and very non-specific. So that was the case with this one, and come to find out, despite, I think, every PSAP in Iowa getting those automated alerts, including the state program office, we had no impacts in Iowa. So, you know, had we done any mass notification, it would have been incorrect. And besides the fact, it wouldn't have been timely at all. So these went out basically across the nation, and there were definitely some states impacted. So because of the scope and size of the outage, the FCC is looking into it. We weren't impacted in Iowa because the outage was on voice over LTE. We don't have that service in Iowa for AT&T, but other states do. That's why they were impacted. And AT&T has recommended, as part of their filings with the FCC, that local PSAPs improve their mass notification to alert the public when something like this happens, to which my immediate thoughts were, well, your alerts aren't actionable. We couldn't have done anything with this, and oh, by the way, we would have been wrong had we alerted the public to this outage. So I'm not exactly sure where all that's going to go, but I know it was a talking point, and it just happened to fall like the afternoon of the last council meeting. So I just kind of wanted to give everyone an update on that. Any questions? And then the other interesting topic that came out since the last 911 council meeting is the Siri 108. That's something that's built into a lot of smartphones, and it's kind of smart, actually, where if you're traveling in another country, it's built in to know and recognize other countries' emergency numbers, whatever they may be. So it's kind of a prank right now on social media asking Siri to say 108, which I would recommend you not do because that will make an emergency call. It gives you 5 seconds and then it makes a 911 call. There's probably other numbers that work. I haven't necessarily tried them, but it is programmed that way for a reason. It's, again, if you're traveling and you don't know the other country's codes, the phone recognizes that and will make the appropriate emergency call, whatever nation you're in. So I haven't heard too much feedback that that's been an ongoing issue in Iowa. I've heard only a couple instances. I think a lot of times on social media, you think you're going to get something funny back from Siri, like cats and dogs, cats and dogs, cats and dogs, and instead it makes an emergency call. So just kind of be aware that that's out there. I know KCCI and Des Moines at least picked up that story a couple weeks ago, so we decided not to do anything about it on our social media outlets just to not make the issue worse than it needs to be. But wanted to bring it up to everyone to make them aware. Any questions on that? All right, I think that is the extent of my report.
Okay, thank you. Technical advisor, any updates from any of our, yes? Yeah.
I just had an item to share here. I attended a couple of conference calls last week in regard to the FCC and the FAA. It looks like they're moving forward. Maybe you're aware of this, that rural wireless towers between 50 and 200 feet are going to require marking. That means either paint bands white and orange, possible lighting, and or orange marker balls on the guy wires if they're a guide tower. So it appears they're moving forward with that. The FCC is going to roll it out, and the FAA with the requirements July 1st. Tower operators that fall within that footage would have to complete that by July 1st of 18. So that's a major expense that will be coming up. I don't know if that impacts towers for 911, but I wanted to share that with you today. So that's all I had.
Jack, who was what towers again are involved with that?
What towers?
Yeah, whose towers and what heights?
It was between 50 and 200 feet, which if it's under 200 feet currently, you don't have to mark them.
Any tower?
Any tower. Yeah, this, for the FCC FAA new rule, it's going to impact new towers and existing towers. I don't believe there's going to be any grandfathering. There's going to be probably some exceptions. Basically, this is coming from the crop duster industry, complaining about meteorological towers being out in the rural and causing them problems with their aviation. I personally, we operate 3 towers that are out in the country, out in the field, so, we're probably going to be impacted. And like I said, it's going to be a major expense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even 50 feet to light or paint a tower is kind of ridiculous, but.
So we're waiting for the FAA, FCC to, clarify the rules here. And like I said, I'm sure there'll be some exceptions, but what they are right now, I'm not going to say.
Good. Thank you. Anybody else with any technical stuff? Okay. Iowa interoperability update, Mr. Allen. Could you hold on one, just you can stay. I forgot to ask who's on the phone with us today. Is there anyone on the phone with us today?
Tom Berger from Iowa Firefighters Association.
Okay, Tom, thanks.
Greg Brooks from Synergym Technologies is on.
Could you repeat your name again?
Greg Brooks.
Okay. Thank you. And anybody else?
Gross with Geocom.
Okay.
Stacy with Geocom.
And anybody else? Okay, thank you. Great.
Good morning.
Morning.
The primary areas of effort for the board right now are twofold. The SKIP update, which was our strategic plan that will be done June 28th. So there'll be a calendar invite coming out to all of you I'll send it through the Stephen and Bob. Stephen, Bob, and Blake have been invited to a number of meetings that go on between now and June 28th in preparation for that. It is a complete forklift exchange. It's not going to be like anything that you've done or seen before. The intent of this skip is that it will drive the agenda of the board through the agenda of the committees so that we will align along 4 areas of LMR, FirstNet, or broadband. By the way, guys, it's FirstNet, whether you do it on your own or you do it through them. It's still named FirstNet, but it is broadband. And then the administrative obligations that the board has, and any that you have that you wish to include in that report. And then number 4 is kind of everything else that's communication related in the ecosystem. So the reverse 911, the Amber alerts, just kind of anything that requires the public to contact us or us to contact the public. So this is a DHS expectation, is that just because we in Iowa are aligned one way doesn't mean that it doesn't encompass all of the communication issues that we need to be thinking about holistically. So that's the purpose of the skip, so that they get kind of a picture of what we have. It helps then Jim Lundstedt and his team support us with things as new laws are being rolled out or new expectations come around. So it's a really exciting time, because if you think about it, the strategic plan that they rolled out was a Yellow Pages phone book the first time through. I mean, you had to have all the background about your community. Now we're getting down to a real strategic plan with 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5-year objectives. And so FirstNet probably will be one of those 5-year undertakings. There'll be others. But that will be one of them, so that we'll have milestones along the way. The other thing we're doing is this time we're tying money to it, because we have 2 elements of funds. One is state funds that is appropriated to the board. The other is the grants. So the FirstNet grant and others that are PSIC and others that have come along in the past, we now tie those not only to the deliverable or the goal, but also to the committee and the action plan of the committee. So if we do it right, our money should be following those things which are most important to get done. And so I hope that at the end of this, that's my kind of going away present, is Jim Lundstedt, with his help, we got this to the front of the agenda. Iowa's the first state that they're bringing this new forklift exchange out, and part of that's because I'm leaving. So we wanted to give you guys a brand new strategic plan to move forward with over the next 5 years, and hopefully you won't have to have another one for at least 3, but updated on an annual basis. I believe the board's excited about trying to put a dashboard then up on the web so we can see where the milestones are and the progress that we're making in those places where maybe we're getting a little bit behind and what we'd have to do with regard to resources. So I remind you that the single biggest resource that the board has and that you have is your volunteer cadre. And we've got a pretty healthy group of folks. Many of you on this panel, particularly those involved in public safety, help us on a regular basis, and that's much appreciated. But as we look forward to the next 2 items, which is the LMR rollout and FirstNet at the same time, we went from having a child to having twins. I want that to settle in for just a minute, because it couldn't have come at a worse time for Iowa. If it had been a year ago or a year from now, but to come at the very same time that you're trying to bring closure to an LMR system this year and all of the nuances and the compressions that go along with that. And then they show up with that state plan for FirstNet sometime this year, lay that on the governor's desk. The moment it's signed, AT&T turns on the dial tone, which is what they have said at the SPOC meetings. It's going to get interesting, very interesting. And I leave July 7th. So timing couldn't have been either better or worse, depending upon your perspective. So the other thing that we're sort of struggling with is not struggling with, but trying to make sure we make a good decision on is, and you may hear about this, is the ISSI switch. So the LMR system was purchased with an electronic interface that allows this core of the ISICs to connect with one other core. And so how do you use that one-to-one connection? Because there are many systems that would like to connect. The cost of that is serious. It's not insignificant. The monthly fees to keep that ISSI up are very significant. And then the technological skills it takes to keep up with it is even more significant. So right now, DHS and a number of us have gotten together and we put a work group together to just explore kind of what are the best practices in ISSI, who's using it, what are their experiences, and I kind of regret to report to you that there's not very many people that are using it that like it. There's not very many people using it that are comfortable with its outcome. And if there are, we can't seem to find them. So there's everything from keeping software updated to, and it's been a broad reach. I mean, I was on a call yesterday for almost 3 hours, and there were probably 30 different entities represented, and it turned into a venting session. And it, you know, they're blaming the vendors, and I don't know that that's fair, but it is a dilemma. And so does Iowa want to take that on? Do we have the human capital, the skills, knowledge, and abilities to manage it and keep up with it? And I question that under our current organizational structure. You don't buy ISSI people cheap. You know, that you're getting into some heavy lifts there. Or you're going to pay a significant contract to a vendor or vendors to support the back end of that. So as we look at this, there are other ways I think that we might be able to skin that cat of interoperability without having to do it at the switch level. And if you, I don't think I'm going to make a presentation on it today to the board, but there will be a presentation coming as to where that application is very elegant and where it is inelegant. And we happen to fall in right now into the inelegant side of that, at least as far as I've been able to find so far. So a lot of energy for the board is going into the LMR outreach. There's a lot of questions coming out now. People have bought equipment. Hey, how do I get it tied in? How do I test it? How do I get the talk groups, interoperability? What do we do with encryption? I could roll on for the next 5 minutes just saying the questions that are coming out. So what we're doing now is revitalizing the RICs. There was had a conversation yesterday about how do we help, because the challenge is everyone knows it's coming, but few understand the ramifications of the change. And when you move from analog to digital, that's one shift. But when you move from digital to trunking, it completely changes your thinking. It completely changes the thinking of your operators. It completely changes the thinking of your users in the street. It's just, there's a lot of training that has to go into this so that we don't have someone in the wrong place at the wrong time and bad things happen. Then the system gets blamed, or really the system did exactly what it was supposed to do. We didn't know how to use it. That's probably one of our biggest concerns. How do we make sure, and then more importantly, getting that local involvement. If you look at your group here, it's almost everyone's local. So how do we get that local involvement? And I think there's a bit of a fear for getting engaged because they don't understand it. They understand the technology they're using. This new technology can get really complex quick, and it takes a lot of research to get into it. Fortunately, we have some very strong leadership in that area. Rob Dennert is one of them. Wally Walser's another. There are a couple others, but when you look around, actually, these guys could compete at the national level. They could go to any of these nationwide meetings and add value to that conversation. I go to those meetings, so I assure you that is how strong you have with a couple, but we only got a couple, and you're getting a new SWIC. So we'll have to see how that transition goes. So we really need to stand up those RICs to make sure that the local users, the potential local users, have an understanding of what they're getting into, and if they choose not to, what they understand what that consequence is. As I mentioned, the FirstNet award took place, so now that seems to be settled law. AT&T is going to be the vendor. We'll figure out what all of that means as we get more information about our state plan. The process is the state plan will come to the SPOC. The SPOC will give it to the broadband committee. The broadband committee will review it. Each of the RIC chairs and vice chair is a member of the broadband committee, so if they show up, they get a chance to participate in what that looks like before it gets presented to the governor. And then either signed off on or not, and then I think we've got 90 days to make our decision. Now, the broadband committee is also looking at what if it's a bad plan and we need to opt out? What does that mean to Iowa? Because then the cost is all on us to do it. And so it may not be the plan we want, but we may not have a pocketbook deep enough to cover the other half of that. Just those are the kinds of things that we have to think about. I'm reminded of when I was a young man going into the auto parts store, there was a big sign across the wall: to go fast costs money. How fast do you want to go? To get coverage costs money. How much coverage do you want? So anyway, get ready for lots of training and coordination on the FirstNet effort. That will be coming in when it happens. There are firm timelines that the state has to meet, and I'm sure that members along here in your council will be hopefully deeply involved in that. So now to me, I have 2 meetings left. I will be at the May and the June meeting. My contract ends July 7th, and that is before the next meeting of the board. So if there's anything that I could or should be doing for the council, I would like to hear about it soon so that I can get done. I've tried to stay close contact with Blake over the last several months, and I believe we've been able to get out in front of a number of things, but if there's something that I could or should be doing for you all, I would like to hear about it so that I can get it done before I leave. And as part of that, I have been, and by the way, the new SWIC selection process is moving along. We have had candidates, we have had interviews, we haven't appointed someone yet. The board will meet today, but I think that will happen after this board meeting. The other thing is that in looking forward, kind of a precursor to what I'm going to be talking about with the board is I believe that now's the time for the board to look at having multiple deputy SWICs and get a little more diversified, because we are getting far more specialized. And so there are some folks that bring unique skills, knowledge, and abilities, probably not as paid, but as volunteer. When you look at things that go on in TIA and just sitting down and have a conversation with encryption, there are a few people in the state of Iowa that can sit down and actually have a valid discussion about encryption. And you're going to see that. If you stay in this business the next 5 years, we are one mess. The Boston bombing brought that out. There was just one mess away from almost everything becoming encrypted. That's Craig's prediction. I'm not saying that that's written in law. I'm just saying that you see communities, we have communities in this room, maybe not in the room today, but in this room often, that are looking at doing entire encryption of all of their operational aspects. And so that really changes the lay of the land when you're working with your partners and you get into interoperability. So where do you keep the keys? Where do you keep them managed? How do you keep it secure? How do you keep them getting in the wrong hands? How do you keep sure it gets into the right hands at the right time? And the changes all occur. So there's a lot of moving parts to that. So there's just, I think that it's time for us here in Iowa to start having some resident experts that can come in and help in those areas, because it's going to get far more. I predict a bright future for complexity, and I think we're approaching it. So my final topic is I want to say thanks to Tracy publicly here and at our meeting. Tracy has really taken on a lead effort in helping get the policies developed for the LMR system. They have done she and her team have done an archaeological dig across the country to find best practices, and we're now trying to incorporate those into what will be policies so that Iowa doesn't, hopefully, we're not making any mistakes that are avoidable. And so my hat's off to her. She has really done a fantastic job with the things that I've seen, and she's got a team of others that are behind her, but clearly she's doing the heavy lift, and so I wanted to publicly thank her for that. I will now take questions from anyone that has them. Yes, sir.
Craig, AT&T got that FirstNet contract. my police chief came to us and he was real concerned because we just simply don't have the AT&T tower presence in our county. Do you have, are they gonna build out towers?
Well, yeah,
Brent, or
so
what?
I'm glad you asked that, Bob, but that, if you remember back, when we first, I don't know, probably 2014, we went out and did what was called the High Thing Survey. Every county, what do you got? And we kind of developed this model about what it might look like to try and get down to, at that time, every square yard or meter of Iowa having some level of coverage. And so there is a plan. It's out on Chasm now. We've uploaded it to Chasm. So AT&T would have access to developing relationships with those local, county, state, private users to increase the coverage. So it's recognized no matter who got it, there was going to, I mean, Iowa's kind of sliced in unique ways. I mean, we got the whole U.S. cellular market, or U.S., I think that's a company. There's parts of southern Iowa that they have a very strong presence, but then there's other parts where maybe Verizon or AT&T has a stronger presence. So how that gets amalgamated, they could have, but quite frankly, there's nothing that I know of that prevents them from having sidebar agreements with another vendor to provide that coverage, should they be interested. Now, that doesn't mean they will be. So if your area is brand X and they have the best coverage, they could very well forge a, kind of what we call here a 28E agreement, but an intergovernmental agreement or an agency agreement, because now they represent, they're part of a government entity, represent that and provide and build out. So their goal is, according to the messages that I have heard on presentations I have been involved with, is that they have a significant presence in each of the states. If you look at their national map, there are places, and particularly in Iowa, there are some places that have a big need for improvement, but there's a lot of places that they have good coverage. So they can go in and turn that switch on, and they are doing two things, Bob. One is they are giving priority access, which has not happened before. So your personal cell phone and the public safety's MDT got the same priority. It will now be MDT first after the agreement is signed, everybody else's cell phone second. And that just says that if waiting for a channel, the first channel available would go to a FirstNet user as opposed to me making a phone call or sending a text. Okay? By December of this year, they are saying that there will be preemption. Now, I've heard it used in a variety of ways, ruthless preemption. And what that means is that when a police officer or an ambulance or a fire hits FirstNet, somebody's call gets dropped. Now, what criteria they use to drop it, length of time, I don't know what criteria they're going to use. There will be some sort of algorithm because they're going to get a lot of grief about that. So ruthless preemption is something we're familiar with in the trunking business because we do that. If you're a garbage truck talking about a recipe unit to unit and you've had a 30-second call and Rob calls with a 911 call, the garbage truck gets chopped off and his radio traffic goes through. That's called ruthless preemption. We just interrupt the call. You're talking and now you're talking to yourself. So how they manage that on the AT&T side, I don't know. And whether it's 4G, 5G, what technology upgrades they have to do to make that happen, I can't speak to that either. That part has been very opaque at this point, but that is what they said. First, you're going to get priority access on the moment you sign. So evidently that's an easy programming for them to do, is if you're a FirstNet user, you'll have priority access. The second thing is that's my word, preemption. And that will happen fourth quarter, they said December of this year. So there's some things that I think are fairly attractive. Now we still have to see what the price point is and what the coverage level really and I don't know if I've told this group before, but when you build a radio system, there are 7 things that are important. Coverage, availability, reliability, and then you go through the rest. But it's coverage. If you can't get coverage, the rest of it doesn't matter. And so you bring up a really good point that AT&T doesn't necessarily have a spot in your community, but that doesn't mean that they won't, and they can't, and they couldn't have it promptly, particularly on that's what the state plan is supposed to help us see. How do they plan to make that happen? Anything else?
If on the bumping of calls, has that been cleared through the FCC yet?
You were talking to a man who knows just enough about it to be very, very dangerous. So what I did is I recited to you what I heard. If it's wrong, I'm legitimately wrong.
Regarding the coverage, so AT&T, they are aware that the state of Iowa is requesting basically border-to-border coverage, and they have maps on the locations, basically where the spectrum is not as good and where the coverage is lacking. So they have those maps, and to your point, on day one, that's something they will work to increase, because there's, particularly from the rural communities, stronger voices on the coverage gaps, and that was addressed pretty quickly and pretty promptly through AT&T representatives. So they are aware of some gaps, and that it will be a focus on getting to that end goal of border-to-border coverage for AT&T. So
Yeah, Iowa has had a unique public-private partnership for 2 years. I think they've had 5 meetings now, as I recall. I haven't been to all of them, but I've been to most of them. And so the telcos, local telcos have been involved as to how to help drive that. So I don't know that they'll have any more answers at this point, but I suspicion that as the vendors look at how they can solve the problems, I mean, there's a lot of vendors in Iowa to help them get that done should they choose to work with them. Anything else? All right. Well, like I said, if there's anything you need from me before I leave, kindly let me know. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Okay, legislative issues.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Senate File 500 is up to now, has been moving very smoothly. Through the Senate side, we had a commitment from Representative Worthen on the House side that he would take the Senate version, bring it through the House, and get it on the governor's desk. In the last week, there's been some amendments proposed to that. And there's basically 3 amendments. One would require a plan and allow an increase in the consolidation grant to $500,000. The other one would be language adding to allow the use of the surcharge for accessing networks other than the LMR and Raycom's networks. And then the 911 Council being involved in decisions regarding network access. Most of the amendments are non-substantive, I guess. They don't deal with money. The lobby's been working on these issues. There's some concern at this point whether or not there's enough time left within the session to get these amendments placed and then moved through both houses and put on the governor's desk. The other concern that the lobby's expressed is that when we open the bill this late in the game, there's always that fear that the money for the LMR could potentially be stuck back in there, where currently it's been all struck out. So where this goes, I think Blake indicated that the session will probably end on Friday. I would encourage everyone to pay very close attention to their lobbyists and be prepared to contact their local legislators to ask them to push this bill through. Whether it goes through in its current version as is very good for the local PSAPs. Whether these amendments get added to it, like I said, they don't deal anything with money. They're amendments that are technical in nature, and if they go through, fine. If they don't, it just gives another initiative some strength for next year. And I guess that's pretty much. I'm very concerned about the bill at this point, that it's going to go through it all. So please pay attention to what's happening.
Any other comments?
Well, I've got a couple of questions actually for Blake and maybe Bob for clarification on some of this stuff. There's been there was a conference call with APCO and NENA the other day, and there was some pretty good discussion regarding some of the amendments and some of the language that was in this bill, specifically the wording that it says that it can be used for local costs related to accessing the state's interoperable communication system, which I don't have a problem with per se, but the perception that some people had was that that was limiting it to only the state interoperable communication system and not local systems like Sarah or the Pot County system, or even if a border county up north wanted to get onto Minnesota's Armor system or something, that those funds wouldn't be able to be available for that. My argument on that was that the very first part of that line of that sentence says costs related to the receipt and disposition of 911 calls. So I've been asked, and I hate to do this to you, Blake, but I need to get some clarification and verification that would, with that wording, receipt and disposition of 911 calls would include any regional system, whether or not it's specifically named, or statewide system, whether or not it's specifically named elsewhere in the document.
Yep, that's something that we've talked about since the initial Senate study bill was drafted. And if you remember, in the early versions of this bill, that language was stripped altogether about accessing any system. And the reason why is that language is absolutely redundant. Again, going back to the line right before that you mentioned, the disposition of the 911 call. So you're absolutely right. You can use local 911 funds once it's in your accounts to access the statewide radio system, a local system, a regional system of your county's choice. The entire argument is silly.
Okay, so that this is perfectly clear and in fourth graders' terms. If the PSAP grant comes back, like the $100,000 grant that we had a couple of years ago, if that were to come back, or we were to get funds from the wireless 911 fund back to the PSAP, once that hits our bank accounts, that we are free to use that for accessing any system that we deem necessary to operate or interoperate with either local or on a statewide basis.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I just want to kind of clarify why that's a little bit different than the current fiscal year we're in. If you remember right now, the current fiscal year with the grant process, there was the virtual language that was in there. And that required, the collaboration or coordination of two separate PSAPs. Well, that was specific for that grant for this fiscal year. Well, the virtual language is all gone in the proposed bill for next year. So literally, any 911 funding can be used for any radio system that the local jurisdiction wants to use it for, as long as it's for the disposition of the 911 call.
Okay, thank you, Blake. I really appreciate that.
Okay, anyone else? Mike, nothing?
I'm good.
Okay. All right. We'll move forward then. Items for discussion. NENA I3 architecture standards and APCO's response regarding that. I'll turn that over to Rob Dennert.
Rob with a B.
Yep.
Back in March, apparently APCO sent a statement to their membership entitled The Vision for Next Generation 911 and the Role of Standards, essentially blasting NENA's I3 standard, which then instituted a volley from NENA back to APCO that it was a standard. And I just wondered if the council was aware of that and had any thoughts of this bickering between these two very large associations of ours.
Nothing that I'd care to voice publicly.
I can take a little bit of that. First of all, let me say I am very glad that in Iowa, APCO and NENA get along perfectly. And the association of my counterparts, NASNA, polled its membership. And like Iowa,
the vast majority of states do use I3 as the basis for their statewide systems or what they're trying to build to. But I think as we found in Iowa, even within that I3 standards, there's pieces that either haven't been developed yet, and again, it's more of a concept that we're working towards, or there's wiggle room within the standards the way they're written. But again, the vast majority of states use I3 as the standards that we want to work towards. I think could they be improved? Absolutely, but what also our fear was if you start getting multiple standards out there or competing standards, you're already introducing you're introducing even more confusion and chaos to states, local jurisdictions as to how you go about interoperating and communicating and doing 911 into the future. So I guess my perspective, and maybe it's changing a little bit, but my perspective has always been APCO generally focuses more on the telecommunicator and NINA more on the technology or the network stuff. So I don't know if National APCO is making a change in their business model, if you will, but from NASNA's perspective, we came out strongly supporting the I3 standard.
I think we just need to be aware and continue to monitor the situation.
Anybody else? Any other comments? Yeah.
Craig Allen, the SWIC. The standards are so important to you and your teams. Standards are supposed to eliminate confusion and vendor mischief. And I say that in the strongest terms, because cheap does not necessarily mean workable. It means cheap. Remind you of the project management rule. You can have it good, you can have it fast, or you can have it cheap. Pick two. And as you pick cheap, you can see the quality curve fall. So standards set the baseline for how far that quality curve can fall. What you are talking about now is a national debate because of things like P25. We're seeing it in encryption. There are particular companies that will offer an inferior encryption product at far less money. We're seeing the discussion now between public safety grade and mission critical. You're running an operation, you need to run down the street, you need people to talk, you run down to Walmart, you buy some family radios, and people can talk. That's a mission critical piece of equipment in that particular operation. But it is not public safety grade, and if you run into gasoline, it will blow up the gasoline because of the spark in the radio, or something like that, natural gas. So the design that we're looking for, yes, they get more expensive, but they're driven by standards. So in the telco industry, years ago, there was more one-off. In fact, I remember when my first volunteer fire call in the 70s, we went on a mutual aid call and the fire hose wouldn't line up. Our hose wouldn't line. Who sold them that? Or who sold us that? I don't know. But anyway, we're struggling with that today in interoperability. So as we look to the standards, what I would encourage the council to do is perhaps partner with the board and let's put out a policy statement to help drive alignment so that they're at least within Iowa, we have an agreement as to what makes the most sense. We did that with P25. The board passed a resolution. Many of you were involved in helping put that together. Another one was the AES 256. So with the skip now, just to be clear, anything that's passed, a resolution that is passed by this council and posted to your website or passed by the board and put to our website is in the skip by reference. So when they go to get grant money, they've got to be compliant with the rules that you've laid down here. Because if you remember, I believe it was Bob made the resolution, P25, upgradable to TDMA, 2-slot, et cetera, way back when, probably 2 years ago. But that is important because now if any federal dollars or other dollars come available, they require it to be tied to the SCIP. The Fire Act grants require it to be tied to the SCIP. So now we're buying equipment that won't let people get off on their own and bring a Tetra or something else in here that we just don't have a way to work with. And so these standards, as you look at this, it's getting closer and closer. The systems that go on within a public safety dispatch center have to align more than they did 5 years ago. And 5 years from now, they're going to need to align even more so that you can push and pull calls along with the radio system, along with those things that go across FirstNet. So I really thank Rob Dunnett for bringing this up. This standards piece is critically important. And what does that mean for Iowa? And so we don't allow some of our users to make bad choices thinking they're doing the right thing because they've got a vendor that they're friendly with and it's inexpensive. And then they put their money in it and it won't do what they need it to do in the end. So if that is something that you folks think is important for resolution here, I would encourage us to talk about that perhaps here. Blake and I can work on something or through the committees, whatever. But I think that if we get it gaffed with a pin that we as Iowa are doing this, that sends a pretty strong message and it helps the vendor community know what to steer away from. That was my comment.
Thank you.
Yes. Maybe I will comment. I would think that the council should take a position and let National APCO and NENA know in no uncertain terms that it is not acceptable for both of those organizations to go in different directions at this time. For the very reasons Craig talked about there, you know, all the technology that's coming to bear, now is not the time to have two disparate opinions coming from our national leaders in this arena. They need to get together and come up with a common platform that we can all adopt and move forward with. Otherwise, we're never going to get to the end result.
I'm going to back that up too. I was going to make a mention of that very same thing that I think the council needs to look at drafting a resolution and passing a resolution supporting the NENA I3 standards. I'm going to switch my hats from the NENA rep on this board now to the Iowa chapter vice president for APCO and say that I think the APCO board needs to also meet on this and send a letter or recommendation to national APCO from the Iowa chapter that we support the NENA I3 standards and that for the exact same reasons, we don't need disparate standards for 911 in Iowa or anywhere in this nation. We need to be on one standard and one voice. This isn't VHS and beta anymore. We need to have that one standard. So I think that I'm going to bring that up to our APCO president and maybe have a conference call and send direction to National APCO. But I think this board also needs to do a resolution so that the state's firmly behind the NENA I3 standard, which I do not think there's any flaws with whatsoever.
Rob, would that be something that you would be willing to work with Blake on to bring back to our next meeting?
Yes, I can do that. Wonder Twin Powers activate.
Okay, very good. We'll bring that back for the next meeting then. All right. Anything else on that topic? Any comments from? Okay. We have no unfinished business or travel request business from the floor. Any issues from the floor that anybody would like to bring up? Okay. Any last comments from anybody? Council? Okay, then our next meeting will be on May 11th at 9 a.m. again here at West Des Moines City Hall. And with that, we will be adjourned.